Rich people of Reddit, when did you lose everything? The Somali Civil War. My grandfather had a manufacturing company, but the war ruined it. My family used our last $500,000 to get our relatives out of the country. The same thing happened to mine. We lost all our farms and houses and barely had enough left to leave the country. Growing up, my best friend's family was extremely well-to-do. I'm talking running with the bulls in Spain. Private jets to Aspen to ski, kind of rich. My friend had every toy, gaming console, and cool piece of clothing imaginable. Right before our senior year of high school, my friend's dad killed himself. Turns out he was cooking the books at his business as well as falsifying his taxes, and the company was basically worth nothing. He was looking at 30 years in prison. So he just decided to end it all. My best friend went from a 500 square foot mansion on the water to a 200 square foot condo with his mom and 2 siblings. He adjusted to being poor like the rest of us, and he is still my best friend. My wife's aunt used to be rich. Was married to a brain surgeon who was also on the board of directors for all the local hospitals, so pulling down 2 checks. She was a platinum member of a local casino and would send us and other family members coupons for all-inclusive weekend visits to the casino. You literally did not need to bring any money for anything. All food, drink, gratuity, act was all taken care of. Anyway, her husband had his medical license revoked for writing too many scripts for painkillers to her and other people, and they both now live in Mexico somewhere. This right here. I've seen so many old doctors get in trouble for things like this. I'm currently a doctor in training, and they specifically tell us not to engage in this type of activity because the licensing board can and will take away your license. This story went in my family way before I was born. My family used to be very wealthy. My great-grandfather to be exact. My mother showed me a bunch of photos of wedding and the big houses. She describes my grandpa as a pure soul and would do favors to our family beyond money. One day my great-grandmother got really sick and my grandfather sold houses and spent a lot of money on making sure she got the attention she needed. My family is nowhere near rich now. We have our difficulties, but we take good care of each other. The important thing is that my grandmother lived longer than my grandfather. Not me, alas. But I remember reading an AMA a while back from a Redditor who won the lottery. I think the jackpot was $30 million. And he got maybe $17 million? He was only in his early 20s. 2. He was basically a checklist for how to behave if you win the lottery. He paid off all his debts. Had some fun spending some of it. Then got a financial advisor who gives him an allowance of something like $90,000/year. The rest of the money is invested. Anytime he's in danger of exceeding his allowance, his advisor calls and gives him shit. I wasn't rich but comfortably upper middle class. If I wanted to spend my birthday in Paris, I could. For example. However, I was in a toxic marriage and had been out of the workforce for years raising my children. Once they were older, I got help for my depression and got out of the toxic marriage. At the time I worked for a local newspaper and was able to put a down payment on a modest house for myself and the kids. Then the housing market crashed. Then the print news market crashed. Then my ex-husband withheld child support. I had several very lean years while I built up my own business. And it was incredibly hard. But you know what? I don't regret it at all. I came through to the other side a stronger, much happier person. I have a great relationship with my now grown children and their children. My income isn't impressive, but I have what I need. I can stand on my own 2 feet and overcome adversity. Looking back, I wouldn't trade the experience of the last 15 years for anything. I don't know if this fits, but my ex had a friend who inherited $1 million in cash and near cash assets when his only parent died and he was 20 years old. Now, you aren't just going to retire at 20 on $1 million, but it's a great way to pay for college. Maybe buy a car and a down payment on a house. And invest the rest. Basically, It's a really good way to start your adult life and nearly ensure you'll be quite wealthy in your later years. Did he do any of that? Nope. Bought himself a ridiculous luxury car. Bought cars for his friends. Bought wardrobes of designer clothes. Threw huge parties repeatedly. Etc. Ended up broke in 2 or 3 years and went back to waiting tables to make rent. Sad to see. Gave away all my money to cam girls. I worry about that. My gambling strip club money has been reallocated to be my cam girl OnlyFans money. I'm fine now, but I worry when the world isn't on fire I won't unallocate those funds. When my dad found the other woman. This is a really common story. When you stick your DCK in crazy, you'll often orgasm out your net worth. Some women can be serious predators, parasites. We are pretty well off. We are frugal. But we have a family member who makes 1/4 of what we do, who lives a fancier life than us. Just remember, exterior signs of wealth, cars, house etc. are usually bogus. Invested all my money in a startup. Personally, I thought to jump to conclusions Matt was a great idea. Friend of mine is a direct descendant of a super rich Spanish noble from Madrid. Essentially, this guy made so much money. Nobody in the family needed to work for over a century. But because nobody worked, there was no money added to the family fortune. And it slowly dwindled away. His dad got the last of it and used it to get a degree from a good university and is doing really well for himself. This is what happened to my father-in-law. His grandparents had a lot of money. His mother was used to nice houses, vacations, etc. But by the time his mother was old and needed to be taken care of, her small inheritance was gone. So was anything my father-in-law was originally supposed to receive. Not my story, but my friend's story. He was a multimillionaire living very comfortable. However, he made horrible financial decisions and was left nearly broke. His wife, seeing his net worth plummet, filed for divorce and took half his remaining assets, and he was left homeless. I haven't seen him since. Not me alone, but my family. Both parents got serious illnesses. About $2 million gone in 5 years. I went from really never thinking much about money to everything being gone. Wondering how to run up all of my parents' debts as far as possible to keep a roof over their head before having them declare bankruptcy. American healthcare is borderline criminal. I wouldn't say I was rich, but I had a job that paid $120,000 year after working there for 3 years. My GF of 10 years, who I was about to propose to, left me out of the blue. I had bought a ring. I saved up enough money to help with the wedding and even enough to put down on a decent condo for a starter home. Anyway, after she left me, I fell into drugs and alcohol and ended up losing my job. I ended up getting into an accident when driving drunk. I hit a concrete barrier and only hurt myself, thank God. Don't drink and drive. I broke my back and shoulder blade in an ATV accident, again drunk AF, and am now held together by pins and needles. I can't do labor work anymore and now make minimum wage in the food industry. I lost 3 more jobs due to drugs and alcohol before I finally checked myself into rehab. It wasn't me. It was an ex-girlfriend and her family. Her dad was a war artifact art collector and salesman. The kind of job where one sale equals $5. 100 $000. That kind of quick money made him believe he could live rich. So he lived in a big house. Had another big house in a different state. A timeshare on an island. He would swap out for the newest Cadillac Escalade every 2 years. He managed to run life like this, getting into a habit of really bad spending choices for 20 or so years, until it was revealed to everyone he was subsidizing all of it with credit and wasn't making nearly as much money as he used to or claimed. That was when the IRS and the banks came knocking. He had held on to some artifacts and art and was able to sell those piece by piece to slow down and lessen the blow. But it was an undeniable downward spiral and he ended up declaring bankruptcy. Private artifact collectors and art collections just aren't as hot as they used to be, so he'd have to settle on low prices for all the sales. Now he frequently moves around in a different state to keep the IRS and banks off his tail. And my ex is just about the only person who has stuck by him through this, but there's only so much he can do. I have never been rich, but my family was well above average when I was a kid. My father was a mechanic, and in 1981 he bought a car repair shop that made us money pretty well. Then in 1992 the Bosnian War started and our hometown of Sarajevo was put under a siege that lasted until 1996. In 1994 we were able to escape the city and move into a refugee camp. When the war ended we returned to Sarajevo, and my father's car repair shop as well as our home were in total ruins after all the artillery and mortar fire. We were able to get a new home fairly quickly with the help of some of our relatives, but we never got the car repair shop fixed. It was in so bad condition we just demolished it after we had sold all found scrap metal and usable tools. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm American, but ethnically Slovenian Croat. They call them Bojans where I'm from. Found out my great aunt went to Ljubljana in 1991 to help the transition. She was a politician. Dual citizenship and owned business in both America and Yugoslavia, print shops. Apparently there were hundreds of people like her from all over the world just in her social circle. Thousands or tens of thousands of peacekeepers who wanted to have a nice transition. She came back in '93 and said we didn't fail. There was never any hope to begin with. The West was fine. The East is not. The old story is that her older sister had left in 1898 because she knew things were gonna go wrong. Guess she was right. My parents had built up a multi-million-dollar company over a couple decades before and during my early childhood. Around 2006 they separated and ran each other dry in court. Then the crash came and bankrupted both of them and lost everything they put years into. Unknowingly recently after my mother's parents passed away she was able to take a portion of an investment account that built millions from her father's stock from working in the railroad industry. My father rebuilt his business from scratch, repaired his credit and has grown it bigger than it ever was before. By the age of 21 I've witnessed my life go from rich to broke to wealthy. I am in a great position in life now for my age, but work, plan, live and learn like everything could be again gone in the blink of an eye. My great-grandfather owned I don't know how many acres of vineyards and then lost them all during Prohibition. Everyone in my family from its founding up to my grandmother went to Stanford. But my dad had to go to Berkeley like a peasant. Well, I was never rich. But my great-grandfather was the main accountant of a very big steel mill in the 20s. My grandfather grew up going to school, passionately playing violin and just being the son of a well-off family. Then the crash happened. And for some reasons they lost everything and suddenly my grandfather had to become a manual worker to support his family. No violin. No studying. He was a quiet man in his later years who had lost any ambitions. Married a very strong-willed cook and never disagreed with her. Not me, but my grandfather on my mother's side used to be an incredibly wealthy man in Mexico during the 50s. In his town, he had the most cattle and land and even owned a few saloons. My grandmother was one of the girls he'd used to attract men to spend money there. In his hubris, he surrounded himself with greedy yes men and women who took advantage of his alcoholism and would get him very drunk and sign away his wealth. After he lost it all he abandoned my grandmother and their children and drank himself to death. We have no clue where he's buried if he is at all. I was born working class. Worked hard. Had some luck and made money. I then lost it trading on the stock market. Made more money. Lost it and have repeated the cycle every few years. Yesterday, I did a deal that made a lot of money, but I constantly do high risk transactions that either made a lot or blow up spectacularly. My grandfather inherited a fishing company worth multiple millions of dollars. When the fishing stocks ran out he lost the company but walked away with what should have been enough to set my family for life. Cash burn and poor investments. Lots of it went to good causes like a down payment for a house my parents then worried constantly about losing. More went to failed businesses and a gold mine up north. They were dead broke by the time I was in middle school. I'm sure it's part of the reason me and my parents are so careful with money. Grandparents are fine but rely entirely on my parents and the government. I wasn't ever rich but was set to inherit a nice amount from my grandparents. Enough for college and a house. That was what my grandfather wanted for us all. Well, the problem was my grandmother got a bit demented in her old age and gave a lot of it away. She was really taken advantage of by people around her. A lot of it went to charity. But we estimate about 2 mil went to her. IDK what to call him. Groundskeeper? And his wife. They actually did very little other than squeeze tons of money out of her for years. Including after she went to assisted living and were no longer working for her. After my mother took over the estate, we found out my grandmother had almost no money left. She went to some fancy assisted living which she should have had plenty of money for about 6 months, and then had to go to some Medicare roach motel where she rapidly declined in health and died. Before the move she was active and in fair health. My family is still filthy rich, but I'm not anymore because I chose to save my life and run away when they wanted to murder me to preserve the family name and honor. I've slept on the streets and currently have €2 to my name, but at least I'm alive, right? When I saved the city. Fell in love. I got married. Saved the city some more. Maybe too much. My marriage got testy. Made some dicey money choices. Don't invest in a spider themed restaurant. Then like 15 years passed. Blah. 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 Super boring. I broke my back. A drone flew into my face. I buried Aunt May. My wife and I split up. But I handled it like a champion. My grandma. She inherited most of the money from her husband when he passed. A bit over $2 mil with about $150k divided between the 5 children. My father, her son, does everything for her as she is 93 and has severe Alzheimer's. The plan was to split the money equally between the 5 children when it was her time. About 2 years ago she started asking my father for money to pay for groceries and random things. He got curious and checked the bank account with the inheritance in it, and it was all gone. She had gotten the approval from the bank without my father's consent, which was supposed to happen, and donated everything to the Catholic Church. Not saying that is a bad use of the money, but could have been used to improve the lives of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I wasn't rich in a monetary way, but with family. Although yes, we're well off and now poor. But I'm happy this way. Home is toxic, so we'd always go out. Go to friends. Uncle and grandma. Just being around these guys, it was something else. Grandma died 2018. Uncle 2 months ago, and haven't seen my friends since Corona hasn't calmed yet. Every day it's a screaming battle between everyone, and it gets worse every day. Money can't do shit. We were rich. Poor after 2008 crash, then rich again. No matter how much money I have, they're not coming back, and I can't meet my friends. It's fucked. My grandfather was a massive farmer wheat distributor in the Balkans. Socialism hit while he was building one of the biggest wheat milling factories in Eastern Europe. The government came and took around €1 million in 1974. That was supposed to be invested in the mill. Then tried to rebuild by only being a distributor, since he had the connection, and had a full boat of sugar and wheat stolen from him, worth around 500,000 euros. Interpol got involved, but it was never found. At the point, he was over getting robbed and too old to continue. The factory still stands in my parents' hometown, half finished. My great-grandfather was by far the richest man in my town. He grew up really poor but inherited a massive amount of money from the guy he worked for his whole life. He bought houses for poor widows and loaned it to other people who needed it. But when the widow died, the remaining family hoarded the money. Others never paid him back when they could. He didn't seem bothered by it though. He had enough to live comfortably and just did it because it was the right thing to do for a Christian man. Not me, but my family a long time ago. Back in the late 20s. We started a garbage company. Consumerism was new, as was the trash it created. My great-great-grandma didn't fancy being married to the town garbage man. So we sold the business and started a nice business. We bought some expensive lakefront property. and cut gigantic chunks out every winter. Then put the ice in isolated warehouses and sold it all summer. Then refrigeration came along. The trash business is still around. It's one of the largest in the Midwest. My uncle used to be in good place. He bought his own little house to live with his kids and wife. He could afford brand new, as in 2008 standards, laptop that could cost around $3K. But then he started to steal stuff. Mostly scraps of metal from neighbors and larger companies. He got arrested and almost sentenced for prison. But psychologists said he was unstable during that time. Now he lives in my nana's cottage. Can't afford to pay bills for electricity. Have no shower nor toilet. He's constantly causing car accidents and he's living off of gov money for his children. Accountant was embezzling my funds from a very successful video store business and my wife's acting career. Lost everything except a backward little town I had purchased for my son. It's been tough. But I'm keeping my family and myself upbeat as we transition to the new life. Not me, but an ex-GF. She's East German. And before the war her family were very wealthy, something to do with radio transistors or other pieces that went into radios. Then once the Russians solidified their hold on Germany they lost everything. When I knew her it was the early 2000s and her dad had just about given up using the courts to try and get back any of their holdings. The manufacturing plants had been seized by the Russians and then sold to others. And my ex-GF's family just couldn't afford to fight it legally. They were able to reclaim 2 or 3 private residences. One was a really big manor house. But after 50+ years of Soviet ownership, they were either derelict or just shells and the family didn't have the money to renovate or rebuild. I think they were sold for land value alone.